Today's guest is a true innovator in the world of aerospace and aviation. She's an engineer, a pilot, and a leader who has worked on some of the most groundbreaking projects in her industry. From big companies like Northrop Grumman to startups like Eclipse Aviation, she has played a key role in shaping the world of flight. But beyond her technical brilliance, she's a passionate advocate for STEM, a mentor for the next generation, and an inspiration to all women in aviation everywhere. Please welcome the incredible Jill Meyers.
Thank you so much, Maria. I'm just so happy to be on this really special podcast. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh no, thank you for accepting this and being here. I want to jump in and just say you've been in STEM for your entire life, which is so
Pretty much.
exciting. Can you share what first inspired you to pursue that?
Yes, I'll try to go back that far. So it's interesting because I usually tell people that I got interested in aviation when I was 12, which is the age I was when I went up in a small plane for the first time. It was a friend of my dad's. I was raised in Philadelphia, and my dad had a really good friend in near Beverly, Massachusetts. And he was a scientist and an inventor and an amazing guy and an engineer. And he took me up in his very small Cessna when I was 12. We were there on vacation. And I was just like, okay, this is it. It's like all I want to do is something with airplanes. But, looking back, I was a pretty geeky kid, I guess. And I remember building plastic models of airplanes and aircraft carriers when I was, 8, 9, 10 years old. So something sparked me really early. I honestly don't know exactly what. I know my mom used to tell me that I was reading by age 4 and teaching kids in the neighborhood to read when I was 5, which I don't remember, of course. But and my parents were divorced when I was 3. I was raised by my mother and stepfather primarily. But my mother, who was basically in banking, had a very broad range of interests, I think. And I think that's what kind of sparked me to just really do really fun things when I was little. So
Wow, reading books at the age of 4.
apparently,
You're incredible. You're brilliant.
what's really crazy though is I couldn't walk till I was 3. So there was a joke in my family that I could read before I could walk, which wasn't exactly true, but apparently they weren't that far apart.
But that's a flex. You could go around and tell people I can read before I walk.
Pretty much.
That's so awesome. So you started your path in aviation. What are some of the biggest surprises you encountered during your career?
I think overall there's probably two. One's more negative surprise and one's more positive. The negative, of course, is it's a very male-dominated field still. I started in, pure aviation, joined the Air Force when I was 19, really just wanted to be around airplanes, but ended up getting my degree in aerospace with an astronautical emphasis, engineering degree. So once I got my degree, I started working on satellites and more space type stuff. I gravitated back to airplanes, not too far into that. But I think that the biggest surprise is how still today, 30 something years after I got my degree, that the percentages of women in all of the fields are still like ridiculously low. A couple of the numbers for folks listening who may not know how bad it is. Women are about 5.8%, not even 6% anymore of all licensed pilots in the world. The US only number is about the same. Air traffic controllers are about 16%. Aerospace engineers, my field, it's about 14% at best. And the worst one, which is a shame, it's one of my favorite career fields to mentor folks into, aircraft maintainers, aircraft mechanics are like 2%.
Wow.
But what's really horrifying is not just the numbers, but how they're not changing much. There was a group of women put together by the FAA, directed by Congress during COVID to put together, it was called the Women in Aviation Advisory Board. It was 30 women, rock stars from all across the industry. And they worked for, if I recall, almost 2 years studying this problem and not just the numbers, but like, what do we do about it? And they put a graph up in their final report that was really the most horrifying part of their study in my mind. And it showed horizontal axis was the last 15 years. And then they had a line for not every, but about 8 or 10 of the different career fields. And the percentage of women in all these fields, it's like a straight line. It's just not moving. for 15 years. And there's a million reasons why. On the positive side though, what I really was surprised by getting into aviation and aerospace is the whole concept of transferable skills. I mean, if you look at me as an example, you know, my degree is in astronautical engineering, but I worked on, again, some space stuff, but I worked on all kinds of aircraft. I got hired as an engineer on military platforms, on commercial platforms. My absolute favorite transferable skills story is I was working on an amazing aircraft program at Raytheon in the Washington, D.C. area. And my boss came to me one day and said, "Do you have any interest in moving to New England?" And of course, you know, we vacationed there, as I mentioned, as a kid all the time. And I said, "Oh my gosh, I would love to live in New England, but where?" And he's like, "Well, we'd like you to interview up in Rhode Island." And I'm thinking, okay, Raytheon has a million locations in Massachusetts. What on earth do they have in Rhode Island? Well, it turns out there's a very small facility in Portsmouth, Rhode Island, right 2 towns up from Newport, that is doing all naval ship development. And they were building the first ever stealth destroyer ship called the DDG 1000, the Zumwalt class destroyer. And they wanted me to interview to be the head of system engineering there. And I said, "Well, hi, like I work on airplanes. Like, why do you want me to work on a boat, really?" And my boss said, "You know, you are a radar expert and they need someone to run the sonar program. Like, how hard can it be?" So
Yeah.
I went and moved to Rhode Island and worked on a ship for, you know, 2, 3 years. But the coolest thing is that you can do so many different things in the aerospace slash aviation industry. You can just really work on anything because the education path to get to be an aerospace engineer is so diverse in what you learn in school. And then the applications of it are just, the list is just endless. So that's kind of my favorite surprise.
Oh. There's so much to unpack here. I do want to go back to you mentioned that you became a pilot at 19. Is that correct?
17, joined the Air Force at
17.
18.
You joined. So, what prompted that step for you to join the Air Force?
Well, so back to my flight when I was 12,
Yeah.
went up in a Cessna 140, a tail dragger aircraft when I was 12. Right about when I was 12, we moved from Philadelphia to Scottsdale, Arizona. And we lived about a mile from the Scottsdale airport, which was really, really tiny when I was little. Now it's a really big executive airfield. But my passion for aviation, once that was sparked when I was 12, and then I lived a mile from a small airport, I would just ride my bike to the airport after school and on weekends and watch the planes and sit at the edge of the runway, which security wise you could do back then. And I did some research and found out that you can't get your pilot license until you're 17. So I kind of waited. I tried to get a job at the airport when I was like 15 and they laughed at me. Like I wanted to watch the airplanes and they're like, "No, go away." So they kind of kicked me out every time I tried. But when I was 17, my birthday's in May. So literally when I turned 17, I borrowed some money from my father. Thank you,
Mhm.
Dad. And started flying lessons on my own and flew all
Wow.
summer. And then when school started, so that was the beginning of my senior year, I just flew on weekends, and in the mornings I would fly at 5 a.m. so I could get to class by 7:30, and got my pilot license in the middle of my senior year that December. And then when I graduated, so I will caveat this by saying I do not recommend my path to anybody. Um, I had a full scholarship. I did very well in high school. I was the top 1%. I
Wow.
got a full scholarship to Arizona State University, but I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And no, I didn't think about being a pilot professionally. I didn't think about anything in aviation because I didn't ever see any women in the industry. There wasn't not a single female at my flight school. No pilots, no flight instructors, no other students were female in the whole state of Arizona, apparently, I found out. When the news station called me to interview me, they're like, "You're a girl taking flying lessons?" I'm like, "Yeah." And by the way, that follows a whole concept that I use as a thread, if you will, through a keynote speech that I do, which is called Shifting the Balance. Sally Ride, the first American astronaut in space, she once said, "You can't be what you can't see." And I use that as a perfect example of here I was, had a pilot license, and just had never thought. My flight instructor, who's amazing, who I'm still in touch with 40 years later,
Wow.
he basically never said to me, "Would you like to do this for a living?" Like it never crossed his mind either because I was a girl. So I took my full scholarship to Arizona State, did one semester and then quit, which is the part I don't recommend to anybody. Tossed the scholarship and joined the Air Force. And the reason I joined the Air Force, which is interesting too, I had never met anyone in uniform ever, literally, in my entire life. But when I quit school, I had been working part time and then went full time. It's not at all me, by the way, but I ended up working in the juniors department of a department store because it paid really well. And someone who worked with me, a young woman, came into the store one day for her shift, and she had an Air Force brochure in her hand. I was like, huh, never thought of that. So I read the brochure. I'm like, okay, wait a minute. They'll pay me to finish college? Really? And I can travel and I can be around airplanes? This is awesome. So I went to the Air Force recruiting office, had my pilot license in my hand, stupidly thinking they would let me fly. And they first said, well, you're a girl and we don't do that. So no, which was true at the time. This is in the 70s. And the other reason, also to be brutally honest, is you have to be an officer to be a pilot, and you have to have a degree to be an officer. And I didn't finish my degree at that point. But what they didn't tell me is there's programs through the Air Force that I could have gone through to get my degree and to get in a pilot spot. But they had quotas in other areas and didn't tell me that. So I ended up signing up anyway, basically as a computer systems analyst, because I thought, well, I can just be around airplanes, that'll be plenty for me. And then once I got in, during my second Air Force assignment, which was in Europe, I was working on NATO aircraft in Europe. I discovered this crazy field of aerospace engineering, and I thought, well, if I can't fly them, I could build them.
Yeah.
I applied to a program through the Air Force, got in, one of 5 people in the world who got into this program, and they paid for me to finish my engineering degree. And then I was supposed to become an officer and be career Air Force. That didn't work out. They threw me out of officer training school for being the only girl in the squadron. It's a really long story, and that wasn't the public reason they used. We don't have time for that story,
Yeah.
but that's why I ended up not staying in the Air Force, which was sad
Wow.
because I was in for 8 years and loved it, loved it, loved it. So that's my whole
Wow.
kind of path into aerospace.
I'm I'm speechless.
It's a
It's
lot, I know, sorry.
it's no, it's like a lot in an amazing way how everything just aligned in your favor even when you just took, I don't know, it's just such an amazing story to hear. I have no words. Like you were just there and that opportunity came to you. It does suck that they didn't let you be an officer because of being the only female there. But I will unpack those questions about being a woman in STEM later on. But I did
Yes.
want to ask this one question is like now looking back, what's something you wish people understood more about aerospace or that work that you've been doing?
I guess just how fulfilling and amazing it is. In aerospace, you can do, as I mentioned earlier, so many different things, but you can do like really important things. When I was in the military and was supporting NATO programs, you're helping save the world, you're helping keep the peace, around the planet, and there was nothing more rewarding really than that job even today. I've worked on fighter aircraft. I've worked, which is, again, got its own set of, you just feel like you're doing something really good for the world. And when I worked on small commercial aircraft, as the one example, I live in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I've been here 6 years, but I lived here 18 years ago, I guess, for like a year. I got hired. I was living in Seattle at the time, and my job there ended. And I got called by a recruiter to come and work for a small company here called Eclipse Aviation, which at the time was building what was going to be the first ever aircraft of a whole new genre of aircraft called very light jet, the VLJ. And the Eclipse 500 aircraft, if you want to look it up, it's really cool. It's a 6-seater twin engine, super small, but it flies at 41,000 feet at the same altitude as the airliners. The only aircraft at the time that was doing that. And it was an amazing aircraft, and they hired me to start and run a system engineering organization, which I did. But getting to work on stuff like that, if you're an aviation geek like me, you can just work on the coolest things. My very, very first job out of the Air Force, when I left the Air Force, my very first job was working on something that sits on the GPS satellite that is actually classified and I can't talk about it. It's
Yeah.
like, who knew? Who knew that was there? You get to just do really, really cool stuff.
Yeah. And so like for finding these cool stuff, like how is that process like? Is it on LinkedIn or do you have to network your way?
Well, it's changed over the years, of course. And both of what you said, Maria, is my two favorite things.
Mm.
LinkedIn, which is my favorite platform. I've been on it, I think, since it started. LinkedIn is amazing for job hunting. There was a time when When I was younger, monster.com was, the site to go to. I don't even think they're around anymore. But, LinkedIn has become a platform where some companies honestly will only post their jobs now on LinkedIn and their own websites. Indeed, I think Indeed.com is probably second now for engineering jobs. But LinkedIn and the ability to network within LinkedIn is incredible. I do a lot of mentoring, as you know, and I always make sure that people I mentor have a really, really amazing LinkedIn profile and know how to use it to network. And just networking in general. I mean, I'm a member of Society of Women Engineers. I've been most of my adult life member of Women in Aviation International, been a member of them for 22 years now, I think. And I've run 3 chapters, started 2 of them from scratch. Getting involved in these kinds of organizations, no matter what age you are, is super important. And just as a quick example is I was asked to take over the San Diego chapter of Women in Aviation International when I moved there in 2014. And my very first official chapter meeting, which was January of 2015, someone called me. We had a poster up at the airport. And someone called me and said, is there a minimum age to join WAI? And I said, no, why? And she's like, well, I'd like to come with my daughter to your meeting. It's like, absolutely. So in walks Margot with her daughter, Bibiana, who at the time was 11 years old and had already started learning how to fly on her own. You can't really clock hours when you're 11, but they found a retired Army guy in San Diego and he was taking her up to, show her what it's like. Fast forward to today, I've been mentoring Bibiana since she was 11. She's now in her 3rd year at Purdue University in their pilot program. You can get a degree in professional piloting at Purdue, by the way,
Oh,
which
wow.
I didn't even know until she applied. She's now got a commercial pilot license. I mean, she's like on her way.
Mm-hmm.
But, I was able to set her up to meet pilots and meet Navy pilots and meet airline pilots, and even as a really young girl, to learn what those jobs are like and to start the path of figuring out what she wanted to do when she grows up. She's still not sure if she's going to go military or not, because I keep talking to her about Air Force, and I got her into an Air Force summer program through ROTC a couple years ago that she completely nailed it. But networking to me is the number one thing, because the job market's flooded always. It goes in waves, of course, but there's usually just way too many people applying to a job. So if you just go onto a website and apply, you're just one of how many people, no matter how unique your resume format is or whatever. But if you know someone you can call and ask for help, or you know someone who knows someone, and LinkedIn's an amazing platform to do that for sure.
I agree. I always highlight the fact that networking just it's like a cheat code to like getting at least on the front, like your resume being at the front for you to have that interview and be able to sell yourself. Because as you
Yeah.
said, like now if you go to LinkedIn and you want to apply to jobs, there's already 100 people before you who already applied in like the 5 minutes that that job was posted. So how are you
Right.
gonna be different from everyone?
But one of my strongest LinkedIn recommendations for job hunting is it's kind of twofold. One is I always recommend, and unfortunately it's gotten fairly expensive. It used to be like 19 bucks a month and now it's like
Mm-hmm.
42. But
Wow.
I highly recommend people pay for whatever the lowest level of LinkedIn membership where you pay. It's the second
Mm-hmm.
up one from free. And the reason is 2 things. It gives you 2 features that you don't get if you don't pay. One is that you can see everyone who's looked at your profile. It doesn't filter, it doesn't mask, it doesn't algorithm pick a few and throw them at you. Now, some people have their security settings to where you can't see who they are, but unless they have that, you can see everyone who's looked at your profile. But the second more important thing is it allows you to directly message someone within LinkedIn. You don't have to be connected. You don't have to be introduced. You can message the CEO of Airbus if you want, if you can find them on LinkedIn. And the reason that's important is when I apply for a job on LinkedIn, even when I apply for a job outside of LinkedIn, but if you apply for a job within LinkedIn, sometimes the person who is hiring for that job will put themselves as this was posted by, and it's usually the recruiter, but sometimes it's the hiring manager. So what I do every single time without fail is when I apply for a job on LinkedIn, if it shows who posted it, I immediately send them a message and say, "Hi, hope you don't mind me following up with you directly regarding the application I submitted this morning. And then I tell them a little bit about myself. I send them my website, ask them to review my LinkedIn profile and my website because they already have my resume, which is very different than what's on my webpage. And that usually, sometimes they don't respond, but sometimes they do. Then the other thing is, if you apply for a job and the person who posted it isn't listed, you can still find a recruiter by digging around that company's people page, right? You can click on people and filter by HR and look for where these HR people are and look for someone with recruiter because now HR general is usually separate from recruiting in companies. And you can still send them a message. You can just find someone and you can even say, I'm not sure you're the right person, and you can just proactively go find people. And I don't think a lot of people do that. So there may be hundreds of applicants already, but the percentage of them who take the effort to find someone to write to, I'm not sure it's all of the applicants.
So, for the people who are listening to this or watching this, and they're like, oh, it's going to make me sound so needy, what would you say to those people?
It's how you write the message, and I can coach people on that, but I usually keep it really short. I usually just say, I always say, I hope you don't mind me reaching out to you directly because it comes across nicer in the beginning. I just say, something like, this job just, really is perfect for me. I think I'm an amazing fit for the company. You can highlight a couple reasons why, and then just say, I always say, I invite you to review my LinkedIn profile and my website. Here's a link. Looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you for the consideration. You just make it super polite. You don't make it all about boasting about yourself. If you just make it like, I just like to reach out to someone and, see maybe if you can help me with this application and do it like you're just asking them to help, it goes a long way than coming across in a more forceful way.
Yeah,
And it will make you stand out if you've made that effort for sure.
yeah, that's a
Yeah.
great tip.
Yeah.
And you said you work with students to sort of make sure that their LinkedIn profile is optimized. What's one thing that if someone's walking on the street and be like, what's the one thing I should stand out on LinkedIn? What would it be?
Your headline.
Your headline.
Your headline. Well, there's two, and to me, they're neck and neck. You have to have a good, relatively recent profile photo. There's nothing more frustrating when I interview people when they look 35 in their profile and you walk into the interview and they're probably 60, 70. It's like, you could have put up you can figure out how old someone is usually. Having a relative, my profile picture's probably 4 years old, but I don't look much different, so I leave it.
Yeah.
It was professionally done by a professional photographer.
Mhm.
But the headline is a really, really, really big thing. Most people probably, I wonder what the percentage is. I'm going to guess 90% of people on LinkedIn as their headline have their current job title, director of engineering, whatever. So I spent a couple years with my headline just said, it's complicated. Because my life is very complicated professionally and personally, by the way, but professionally. And it sparked people to go, I wonder what the heck that means. And it would make them open my page and read it. My current headline is, I can't take credit. It's courtesy of Krista. So Krista Demo, who we both know, for those listening. Krista is my favorite person on the planet, if you're listening, Krista. Krista and I met 2009, 8 or 9, at a company that she was just randomly at. And we became instant friends. But Krista is the most insightful business coach on the planet. And even though we're super good friends, I sort of utilize her as my business coach still, which she's very gracious in doing. I have not made a single job decision in 15 years without talking to Krista first. Krista came up with my current LinkedIn headline, which says driver of good things.
That's so
That was
Krista.
all about Krista because she wanted to come up with something. It was a few years ago when I was out of work, and she wanted to come up with something that was descriptive of me, but intriguing enough for people to go, I wonder what that means. And I've had people just write me on LinkedIn who I don't know and just said, oh my gosh, I just had to go in and see what driver of good things looks like. And so having a catchy, if you want to call it that, headline, but something that is descriptive, I think is better than putting your job title, because people can always look at your profile and see what your job title is.
Yeah.
So that's my
That's so
other
true.
recommendation.
Yeah. I just want to say, Krista, the way she puts words on, like, whether it's an email or message or text, she has a way with words that I can't describe it. So you saying your headline, I'm like, that's so Krista.
It is. She is brilliant
Yeah,
and the
she
most
is.
insightful person
She
I've
is.
ever met. Yeah, I love her.
Yeah, she's awesome. And we thank her for introducing us to each other.
Yes, absolutely.
So, I did want to touch upon some of the things that you did discuss of like the mentoring aspect of that you do.
Yeah.
So, for people who are whether studying in engineering, whether it's in aerospace or aviation or any specific engineering,
Mhm.
they're currently an undergrad. What's one tip you would give them to help them get a job after graduation?
I'm going to give you two. Sorry to
Okay.
keep giving you two answers to your
No,
question.
I love that.
One is even though you're learning a ton in school, and believe me, my undergraduate program was extremely, extremely difficult. I went to UT Austin, which is one of the top aerospace schools in the country.
Wow.
A lot of our professors were NASA consultants because NASA Houston is just a few hours away. So just brilliant, brilliant people who made it really hard. I would say try to keep up with the industry on your own. You don't learn a lot of that necessarily in school. And again, LinkedIn, my favorite way to do that. Follow companies that you might want to work at someday. If you want to be in aviation, I would follow. If you want, the big guys, the Boeings and Airbuses of the world. But I would also follow some of the startups doing incredibly cool things. There's a company, one of my favorite companies, which I recommend everyone pay attention to. I actually know the founder and spent a day there more than once. There's a company in Denver called Boom Supersonic. And Boom is building the first supersonic airliner since the Concorde, which, stopped flying decades ago. But they're doing brilliant, brilliant things. Follow Boom and see what they're doing. Follow companies that are trying to do electrically powered aircraft, which is a crapshoot as to whether that'll actually work or not with people in it. But follow companies that intrigue you. Of course, if you're wanting to do space stuff, the big three that are now making NASA look really old and archaic as it is, follow SpaceX, follow Blue Origin, follow Virgin Galactic, even though they're well, Virgin's on hold with flights right now because they're building new vehicles. But they're building new vehicles, which is amazing. By the way, hiring like crazy in Mesa, Arizona, if you want to help them build the new spaceship. So follow companies on LinkedIn and people on LinkedIn that are doing things that interest you to see what's going on in the technology. And then the second thing is make sure you have a mentor. Absolutely. My number one advice to everyone, no matter of age, but for sure if you're in your undergrad program, you really need to have a mentor. And my recommendation on mentors is, especially if you can find a mentor outside of the campus, again, someone, in industry, because with everything remote now, they don't have to be, physically living where you live, but find someone that you can talk to occasionally just to ask for guidance or ask for help connecting with people to find a job or to look at grad school options, whichever. But finding a mentor, I think, is really, really big. And it has to be someone that you really can bond with. I didn't have a lot of mentors when I was young. I mean, I figured out a lot on my own, which was really challenging. But once I had mentors, only one time did I was assigned a mentor at a big corporation, see eye to eye, and we mutually agreed that we weren't really the right pair. But if you have a mentor that really, really understands you and can really help you in a formal fashion or other than that, even just meeting for coffee once in a while or doing a Zoom session once in a while, it makes a world of difference.
And for finding mentors, I know I struggle with this just because of like all the things that I do. And just like when I started my career in biotech, it was more during COVID times and all that stuff. So
Yeah,
how does one come to find a mentor? My mentor right now is my dad. He's always been my mentor. He's the smartest person I ever know. Like
that's
I
great.
know.
That's so
But
great.
yeah, but I want like a mentor who's like a more specific niche kind of mentor rather than just like life advice. How can I find one or anyone that listening to find a mentor?
Well, my number one recommendation for that is to try to find a membership organization that aligns with your career. I don't know anything about your field, but obviously
Yeah.
Krista does. So if there is, a biotech, bioscience membership organization, especially if it's local to where you live, I'm just a huge fan of in person.
Mm.
I'm one of those. Like I tried online graduate school. I just like I have to be in a room with people. I'm not an online learner at all. So for me, sitting down and having coffee with someone is much more impactful than meeting them over Zoom. But the membership organizations, and there's always at least one I'm thinking that aligns with folks in any STEM career. You can always find a mentor through those membership organizations. That's my first suggestion. And then the other suggestion is hate to be a broken record, but LinkedIn. If you poke around on LinkedIn, because the LinkedIn search functions are pretty awesome. You can find people, you can search by, what school they went to, you can search by what company they work for, you can search by all kinds of things. You can even search just by people that you're 2 degrees away from, right? So you know that there's someone you have in common. If you find someone on LinkedIn that you would like to be your mentor, you can reach out to them or ask for an introduction, which is probably better for the mentor side of it, as opposed to the job hunting side. I invite people all the time to go through. Not everyone has their list of connections open to the public, but I do for exactly this reason. So I always tell people, look through my list of connections. And if you see anyone that you'd like to be introduced to, I may not know them personally the way
Yeah.
LinkedIn works, because a lot of people invite me because they just want to see what I post and prefer to be connected than just follow me.
Yeah.
But I know a lot of people all over the world in aviation aerospace, and I love introducing people and making those connections. So I would say, look on LinkedIn for someone who you'd like to ask to be your mentor. I mean, they may say no, but they might say yes.
Wow. Those are great. I never thought about that, like joining or looking for memberships within my field to be a part of. So I'm taking mental notes and I'll rewatch this to make sure I take the right steps.
That's great.
But thank you for those tips. So you
Sure.
did touch upon, and it's like known with all the stats that you gave us at the beginning of how aerospace is such a male dominant field. And during your time, you did touch upon how you had to like sort of prove yourself, work harder. You were in a class of being the only female in that class. How did you handle that pressure?
It was hard when I was younger, for
Mm-hmm.
sure. But what I have done, which has worked well for me, is I try to never make it about that I'm the only female, right? My suggestion to people, it doesn't always work. And in some instances, in some scenarios, it just doesn't work. But I can talk about those. I always encourage people, women, to just do the best you can at your job. Like, pardon my French, but kick ass at your job and treat everybody with respect. And those two things go a long way. When I got to officers training school through this commissioning program in the Air Force, OTS is squadrons of 40, at least back then, squadrons of 40 people. And it was me and 39 guys. And at first I thought, oh, this is great because I get a dormitory room by myself. I don't have to share my room.
Yeah.
And it never seemed to be a problem for me. And then 10 weeks into the 12-week program, they decided to not have me graduate. It's a very long story. But there was a huge scandal. There was a legal investigation. It was a big mess. Luckily, the Air Force didn't let it go by, but it didn't get resolved. And I ended up getting out on my own. I went back to being enlisted and stayed in 2 more years and then got out so I could actually be an engineer. But in industry, though, I mean, I've been discriminated against as a female probably twice in 40 years, which is not bad compared to a
It's
lot of my
sad, but yeah,
a lot of my
yeah.
friends. I mean, I had so the only time I really kind of made a stink about it, because I knew it was because I was female. I couldn't prove it, but I was at a company I won't name, one of the big aerospace companies, and I was hired. I was told specifically in the interview, which was my final interview was a panel of course, all men. And they specifically in the interview said, we have a bunch of internal candidates, Jill, but we really want someone to come in from the outside with a different perspective, which was brilliant. Most people don't admit that. So I
Yeah.
was so excited to join this company. And I was in for maybe 3 months or 4 months, and I was asked to work on a proposal. And in order to work on a proposal for the DoD, you have to know what billing rate you're using for different engineering categories or program management categories. So I asked one of my peers, I said, I don't know can you give me the document that has all the billing rates? And he's like, oh, just use the one that use what we are paid. And he
Yeah.
threw out a number, and I was like, huh, that's not remotely what I make. So long story short, I found out that my peer group in this organization were, I think, 7 other managers, all men, and they were making between $20,000 and $40,000 more a year than me. And I had equal, if not more experience than every one of them. And I went to human resources director, who was a woman. And I said, I just wanted to ask you to check this. It kind of doesn't sound right to me. She did some research. She came back and she's like, yep, that's correct. And I said, and are we going
Yeah.
to resolve this at all? And she's like, oh no, you don't get as much pay because you're brand new to the company. And I said, but that's exactly why I was hired. She's like, yeah, we don't care.
Wow.
So I stayed about another year and then I resigned on my own because of the lack of understanding of equity. And during the rest of my time at that company, I also left for another reason to go do something exciting, but I'm not sure I would have stayed. There were two women I worked with who had been with the company decades, and they were amazingly brilliant people. And the three of us used to go to lunch and just sort of, have a little whining session about what it was like being a female in this company. And both of them told me, well, we keep getting passed over for promotions like over and over and over again, and like we think we're better qualified. And it was just a culture, at least at that part of the company. And the fact that we raised the issue and nobody wanted to do anything about it to me was just horrifying. But that's the only time I've really gone, hey, you can't treat women unfairly and,
Yeah.
wave the flag. But I've overall really not encountered a lot of issues. So, and I think it's because I just do really well at my job and I get along with most people. And, but if there's a really hard inequity, I do raise that issue. But I think just, a lot of women think that to get by in aerospace, you need to, be one of the guys and act like one of the guys. And I'm not a huge fan of that either. I think you just be yourself, whatever that is. And if you just be yourself and work really hard and treat everyone with respect, I think that goes a long way.
Yeah. Wow. It's so sad that that's the reality of women in STEM. I don't know if the right word is like disregarded, but like I feel like it's taking advantage of our brilliance and just like not treating us as equally as if a male did the same
Yeah,
work
and
that I
and
did.
what's really sad too, Marie, is that when I was younger, the big problem was getting women into STEM. And what it has become a relatively new problem, and the Society of Women Engineers is doing studies on this and has been for a while, is we're getting women into STEM and then they're leaving the field because of how they're treated. And that's relatively new. It used to be that once women got in through the door, got good positions, they stayed almost no matter what.
Yeah.
But when you're at a company that, as you said, disregards you and disrespects you, my strong advice to people is always, if it's a toxic environment for you, you can't stay.
Yeah.
And I've encouraged people and helped them with how to get out of a bad situation a couple times in my mentoring role, because I have quit. I've only once in my life quit with no job lined up because it was so intolerable.
Yeah.
They didn't want to do anything about it. And I resigned, and they had a going away party for me. And my boss looked at me. It's a long story, but it was what's called a matrixed organization, to where the person I actually reported to isn't someone I work with much at all. I was like loaned out to a program, and they had this big going away party for me, and we were like all standing in a circle ish. There were like 30 people there, and he looked at me like across the circle, and he's like, "So Jill, I don't think I know. Like, where are you going next?" And I said, "Oh, I don't have a job lined up."
Wow.
And his face just fell. And because most people don't do that, they don't take that leap of insecurity. But it was so intolerable, I couldn't stay.
Wow. And for the women out there that are like just heard that story and they feel like they're in the same situation as you,
Yeah.
um, what would you tell them?
Well, the first thing is, I do encourage people, and I did, to try everything to resolve whatever the issue is. Try to get it resolved.
Mm-hmm.
In that particular situation, I talked to my manager's manager. I talked to other employees, talk to human resources, whether they're helpful or not. Try to get whatever is going on that's not good resolved. My other recommendation to people is, if the organization is big enough, just try to move within the organization. The Boeings, the Raytheons, the Northrop Grummans, they're huge, to where, if things aren't working out for you, you can put in for a transfer and to apply to another job within the company. So I would say, try to get help getting the issue resolved. If not, if you can move within the company if you want to. And then if none of that works, and if you're really miserable, you just need to leave, because life's too short.
Yeah, that's true. You spend most of your time working than being at home, so it's better to have it a better environment or a good environment, or else it's gonna take a mental toll on you.
Absolutely. And I'm one of those
Yeah.
people where I get extremely dedicated to my job,
Yeah.
probably too much at times. So it's such a huge part of my life. And if it's
Mm-hmm.
not going well, you're right. It's just, life's too short.
Well, I feel like with you saying that there is a chance for companies to change their cultural views of how they see women in STEM. I feel like maybe with my experience, more on like the biology side, biotech side, it's not as big of a discrimination, I feel like, as the engineering side of things.
Yeah.
Just because I feel like biology is more, I don't know why, maybe that's just
Yeah.
me. What I've seen is more like a female oriented a STEM major, while engineering is like pretty male dominant. So that's why I feel like it's completely different, and it's so important to highlight that these things still happen in 2025. It's not like something that happened back in the day and then never happens ever again.
No, it's true. And I mean, it's getting better. Don't get me
Mm-hmm.
wrong. It is getting better. And it's actually worse in aviation than it is in aerospace.
Wow.
Just one example, a woman who was in my Women in Aviation chapter in San Diego. She was one of my favorite people to talk about as far as role models. She was raised in San Diego and always wanted to be an airline pilot, but she didn't have, my recollection of her story is they didn't have a lot of money when she was young. So she graduated high school and then I don't remember I think she went to college, but she ended up getting a job working ground crew for I think America West Airlines, one of the regionals in San Diego, and she literally was doing ground crew stuff, baggage.
Yeah.
And as soon as she gathered enough money to go take 1 hour of flight lesson, she would go take 1 hour of flight lesson. It took her 16 years to become a commercial pilot.
Wow.
She finally gets there. She graduates to American Airlines proper. She's a captain in American
Mhm.
Airlines. And she told me not that many years ago that she was on a flight and they landed, and she had the opportunity, as they used to do all the time when I was young, to stand, in the cockpit doorway and say goodbye to passengers as they're
Yeah.
deplaning. And she told me that this older gentleman literally was going up the aisle and stopped in his tracks and looked at her and said, "Oh my gosh, if I knew a female was in the cockpit, I wouldn't have gotten on the plane."
No.
That kind of thing still happens in the
Mm.
airline world. And I think there are enough organizations like Society of Women Engineers, which I can't talk enough about. If you're not a member of
Mm-hmm.
SWE, you got to join SWE.
Yeah.
Their conferences, by the way, are the most fun you've ever had. 6, 7, 8,000, if not more, women all in one place
Wow.
from all different facets of engineering. So,
Mm-hmm.
you get to talk to people doing all kinds of cool stuff.
Yeah.
I haven't been in a long time, but I'm hoping to go this year. It's usually in
Mm-hmm.
October, if I recall. Organizations like SWE and even AIAA, which is the American Institution of Aeronautics and Astronautics, they do amazing work with women in STEM.
Mm-hmm.
Scholarships, mentoring, just a whole lot of assistance to women, and it's definitely making a difference. I wish it was
Yeah.
going faster,
Mm-hmm.
but it is better than when I started,
Yeah.
however many years ago.
With that being said, what's one myth or the biggest myth about women in STEM that needs to be addressed or shattered?
That we don't do as well as men, which is
Mm,
absolutely ridiculous. I
I
mean,
know.
absolutely ridiculous. Um,
I
you're
just want to
either
see like the facts or the data of that. Like, show me. How is it? How is that
you're
possible?
either smart enough to be in STEM
Mm-hmm.
or interested enough to be in STEM, or you're not. I
Yeah.
mean, I have a really good friend. It's a long story. We don't have time for it, but I have a really good friend who used to be a school teacher, and
Mm-hmm.
she got so tired of young girls. I think she taught middle school, young girls coming, or elementary school, one of the two. But she said to me, I got so tired of girls coming up to me and saying, "Well, my parents told me I'm not smart enough to take math classes." And she was just like, so some of it's coming even from family saying, "You're a girl, so you shouldn't do XYZ." It's ridiculous. But it's just the only data that I know of, since you're a scientist,
Yeah.
is there was a study done about female pilots once where they actually proved that physiologically women have more stamina than men in the cockpit and they're actually better pilots.
Wow.
Now, I'm going to get a lot of crap for that,
Yeah.
but you know, just if we could just treat everybody equal, life would be
Mm-hmm.
so lovely. But
Yeah.
the myth that women aren't as smart and aren't as good as male engineers or aren't as qualified as women pilots or astronauts, pick one. It's
Yeah.
just it's all garbage.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of men fail in the field, but we don't talk about them, do we?
Yeah. That's so true.
Yeah.
That's so true. That's a sad truth about being a woman in STEM.
Yeah.
But we'll still show up. We're still here.
Oh, yeah.
We're on this podcast and trying to spread as much as we can positivity and just
Definitely.
motivation that we could all do it. Like you're a true testament, like hearing your story and seeing how far you've come and you've like literally paved the way for women in aerospace and aviation to stand up for themselves and work in these big companies or also startups to work on these badass things. So you have paved the way and it's so amazing to hear your story.
Thank you. Thank
I
you.
do want to ask, what's one thing I can do or the listeners can do to sort of raise more awareness about women in STEM or women in your field, the engineering field?
Go talk to young kids in school.
Mm,
Be a guest speaker at Career Day, which I've done a lot. First of
yeah,
all, it's super rewarding and super fun.
yeah.
But back to my comment earlier about the Sally Ride quote, you can't be what you can't see.
Mm-hmm.
If young girls in elementary school, middle school, see someone on a career day talking about their work, whether it's bioscience or, architecture, I don't care what it is, firefighter, anything that's male dominated,
Yeah.
especially if it's male dominated, but even if it's not, go in and talk to young kids. And honestly, the younger the better about they really should just have the courage to just do what they really want to do. I happen to be friends with a couple of really famous aviators, and they all have the same story, which is when I was 5 years old, I was at an air show and saw a fighter jet go over and said, Dad, I want to be a pilot. There's a lot of studies that show that the spark tends to be lit for STEM careers when you're like 6, 7, 8 years old. It's not middle school, it's not high school. I mean, the spark can be lit at any age, but my point is, a lot of people think that elementary school is too young to go talk at career day. It's not. It's really not. And when I was running chapters for Women in Aviation International, there was nothing more fun than sending someone to a career day if they happen to wear a uniform in their job. I don't care what uniform it was, because that vision is so impactful to young kids. If you have another few minutes, there's an amazing TV commercial, and I can send you a link if I still have it. There's an amazing TV commercial that was done in the UK, and it's basically career day at an elementary school. And the teacher says to the kids, okay, so today I want you to, I'm trying to remember this exactly. It's something like, she's like, okay, I want you all to draw, I want you to get out your crayons, and I want you to draw a firefighter, a pilot, and a doctor. And the kids all draw, and like, I don't know, 80 something, 90% of the kids drew men. And then the teacher's like, okay, we have a surprise for you. And three people walk into the room and they all have headgear on, right? Doctor, pilot,
Yeah.
firefighter. And they take off the headgear and it's all women.
Wow.
And the looks on these kids' faces, it's like they're just like, oh, it's a girl.
No.
And it's the most powerful, powerful thing.
Mm-hmm.
And getting people in these career fields in front of, and I love talking to students from
Yeah.
elementary all the way to college. I love talking to colleges, just letting them know how exciting STEM careers are,
Mm-hmm.
how fulfilling they are, how to get there, what the path is.
Mm-hmm.
I used to meet a lot with high school kids and talk about what college was like,
Yeah.
what the curriculum is like, how to better prep for it to get
Mm-hmm.
into a better position to get into a STEM career, and just talk about how amazing the careers are. It just makes
Yeah.
that's my biggest advice to people. Get out in front of students.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I feel like for me, my inspiration for STEM is my dad is a doctor. So growing up, seeing him do all these things, and
Mhm.
I'm like, oh, biology. I love the body. I love to learn more about what the cells do. And now I'm like working in the cell therapy, like trying to, like in biotech, trying to engineer cells and all that
That's
stuff.
right.
So it's
So
so
you
true to
should
what
go
you're
talk to
saying.
elementary school
I
kids.
should. I should.
And back to these membership organizations, they are
Mm.
usually the organizations that schools will call to say, we'd like a guest speaker. Do you have anybody?
Oh, yeah. Wow. Yeah. And that's why I am also trying to do this podcast is to spread more awareness and bring
Yeah,
the word out there, whether it's just me doing it or other people who have that inclination to talk to younger kids to
yeah.
also go do it. You don't have to have a social media platform to be able to do it. You could just go ahead, volunteer and do it and just shape the minds of the younger generation.
The other thing too is, at least here in Albuquerque, because I've been here for 6 years,
Mm-hmm.
There are so many organizations here that run STEM summer camps.
Yeah.
Try to find those because they're always
Mm.
looking for speakers and people to run workshops. And because I've spoken at two of them here at
Oh.
an organization called STEM Santa Fe, and it's all different age groups. And I went and talked about, aviation and aerospace.
Mm-hmm.
Kids' eyes just light up. It's just really
Yeah.
fun. So
Oh, that's awesome.
try to go light that spark.
Yeah. Well, my final question before we jump into Career Corner is if you could give one piece of advice to yourself at the start of your career, what would it be?
That's a really hard one for me. I would say to be a little more patient with the
Mm,
world and
mm,
myself. I was a pretty knee-jerk react kind of person. I
mm,
still am, but I'm better as I age. Give things a little more of a chance before you jump, because I
mm.
jumped a lot when I was younger. I had really good reasons, but
Yeah.
I wish I had given a couple of organizations longer to be fulfilling for me. And I
Mm,
tended to just, if like one thing didn't go right, I would leave.
yeah.
And I mean, it's big picture, it's not been bad for me because all the things I've done in my career have helped me, get jobs later on because I have such a range of experience. But being a little more patient would be my biggest advice to myself.
Patience is the key to a lot of things. It was so amazing to hear your story and how you've paved the way in the world of aviation, and especially for women in STEM. Just getting your insight of someone who's been in STEM for a while now and has been through like the big companies, the startups. You've like got a taste of it all. So seeing your insight and hearing what you had to say is truly inspirational, and I really appreciate you for giving me your time and just speaking on this podcast. For the next step is Career Corner. So Career Corner is a segment where we get listener submitted questions or scenarios, and we just give our take on it because I want to try to help as many people as we can. And so let's dive right into it.
Okay.
So the first question is from one listener who said, his question is, my dream is to become an aerospace engineer, but I don't hear many people talk about the day-to-day reality of the job. What's one thing that really surprised you about working in this field? Something most people don't expect.
I think it's that on a day-to-day basis, there are so many different kinds of aerospace engineers. And I'll give you just two examples. And you can do all of the different kinds of aerospace engineering throughout your career. You don't have to pick one and stick with it. But on one end of the spectrum, there are what we call design engineers. So an aerospace engineer and that was my surprise, is I didn't realize there were so many types of aerospace engineering
Yeah.
jobs. If you want to be a design engineer in aerospace, you can be the person who sits in front of the computer and does, if you're more on the mechanical side, computer aided drawing, CAD drawing, and actually is designing aircraft, designing spacecraft, the pure design side of it. The other end of the development spectrum, as we call it, is my favorite part, which is the kind of engineer I was, I was what's called a systems engineer, which meant that I worked on the entire system, whether it was a whole airplane or a thing that went onto a part of an
Mm.
airplane. But system engineers, the front end of it is you work on requirements. So you sit down with the customer and try to figure out what they really want the airplane to do. Like, what do you really want it to do, and can we do that? But the tail end of it, which is where I love the most, is called integration and test. So you can be an aerospace engineer where you can get handed the system when it's done, and you make sure the hardware and the software can talk to each other. That's the integration piece. Make sure it works as designed, and then test the heck out of it, which is like the most fun part. So there's so many different ways to be an aerospace engineer. And the third kind of engineer, which is really rare for companies to hire it specifically, but I think it's also super fun, it tends to be when you're more experienced. But a lot of times the people who go out and try to win new business for a company, they're either called sales or business development. If they do their job well, in my personal opinion, from all my years of experience, if they're not technical themselves, they have what's called a sales engineer go with them to
Mm.
potential clients to be able to talk the technical side of it, whereas they tend to talk the business side of it. So there's sales engineers as well, where you're on the road a lot, but you're explaining to a potential customer how awesome your thing is that you've built and trying to help the company grow. So those are just kind of three completely different ways that you can be an aerospace engineer out of many examples.
Yeah, wow. There's so much diversity and there's so many avenues you could take. And and correct me if I'm wrong, it's not one degree that locks you into one avenue. You could
Correct.
take that skill set and apply it in other different avenues based on where your interests lies.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of people who work as an aerospace engineer have degrees in mechanical engineering. That's the
Mm-hmm.
closest one. When I was a hiring manager, I would look for aerospace degrees, but also mechanical engineering degrees. And
Mm-hmm.
depending on what type of work you're doing, an electrical engineering degree, possibly, they tend
Mm-hmm.
to be much more on, circuit board design and computer engineering. But mechanical engineering at most schools has a lot of the same courses as the aerospace program. So that would be like another degree you could get and still totally kill it in aerospace is a mechanical degree.
So the second career corner question is, I love aviation, but I don't necessarily want to be an engineer or a pilot. What are some lesser known careers in aerospace that people should consider?
This is my favorite question. And I could talk about this for hours, but I won't. There are a couple that are more popularly known, like air traffic control. And just to do a slight plug for ATC, one of the things happening recently in air traffic control is I believe they're trying to double the starting salary.
Wow.
So by the way, it's a massively amazing career field. It's very stressful, as you can imagine, being an air traffic controller. There's a very, very long process to get an application in, to get it approved. If you get selected, there's a really long training program in Oklahoma City. I think it's 12 or 16 weeks. But there's other careers that people don't know about. My absolute favorite, which I wish I knew about when I was younger, I would have become one. There's an amazing job that most people never heard of called an aircraft dispatcher. And an aircraft dispatcher is someone who does initially flight planning with the pilot. They do what's called flight following. So once an aircraft takes off, they're monitoring weather, they're monitoring aircraft conditions, and they're like helping the pilot make decisions. It's sort of like a really under the table background job.
Yeah.
But you're training the aircraft dispatcher program, and there's a couple companies that do it. My favorite is called Universal Aviation and Weather in Houston, if you want to look them up. I think they hire a ton of dispatchers, and also the dispatcher works for the company that owns the airplane. So not necessarily the carrier. It's a really interesting mix. But aircraft dispatcher, totally look that up. Aircraft mechanic, as I talked about before, you get a certificate called an A&P, which stands for airframe and power plant mechanic degree. A lot of schools, like for example, there's a community college here in Albuquerque that it's a 2-year program where you come out with an A&P license. So you can become an aircraft mechanic without a 4-year bachelor's. And we like to say in aviation that we need everybody. One of my really good friends is the only aviation attorney in the entire state of New Mexico. She's an aviation space law attorney. It's a very unique field. There's only a few schools in the world that provide lawyers a master's degree in aviation and space law. She went to McGill University, which is the top one in the world, which is in Montreal, Canada. Other schools have it though as well. And you can be an accountant and be in aviation, right? I mean, we need like everybody. But the aviation specific ones are kind of the ones I mentioned. There's also, of course, the military, which I can't plug enough. I've helped 3 young women, 2 get into the Navy and 1 get into the Air Force. The 2 Navy women both became pilots. My friend who's in the Air Force became a maintenance officer. She didn't want to fly. So to the question at hand, she thought she wanted to be a pilot. She started training and she didn't do well and she didn't like it. So she quit and they picked her up as a maintenance officer. And now she's an aide de camp at the Pentagon, working directly for the general in charge of the entire Air Force Reserve. Thank you very
Wow.
much. So military I plug for a couple reasons. One of the main ones is if you can get into any of the academies specifically or go through some of their programs, they'll pay for college, people, and they'll pay for you to learn to fly. They'll pay for you to become an air traffic controller in the Air Force or the Navy. A Coast Guard, another amazing organization. Most people don't even think about the Coast Guard. I have a really good friend who's a Coast Guard, female Coast Guard search and rescue pilot. But the military, if you can handle the military side of the military, and all the branches are different and treat women differently. My recommendation is number 1 Air Force, number 2 Navy if you are female. And it's a great way to get into aviation and get paid to do it and not have to pay for school.
Wow, there's so many different avenues out there, which
Yeah,
thank you for sharing all of these.
sure,
That's
sure.
just like amazing to hear that if you have the passion and you have the will, there's always room for you, no matter where it is, which is awesome to hear.
Yeah, and I'm going to do one more plug for Women in Aviation International because they have hundreds of thousands of dollars of scholarships for
Wow.
women every year.
Mm-hmm.
Last year, I think in the last 3 years, they've averaged around eight or $900,000 scholarships in a given year. And the scholarship cycle starts July 1st. They start posting the scholarships on their website, which is wai.org. When I used to, I haven't done it in the last couple of years, but I've done a lot of letters of recommendation for women applying for them. You do have to be a member, but if you're under 18, by the way, because there's a lot of scholarships for learning to fly,
Yeah.
if you're under 18 now, the membership is free. That's relatively new with the new CEO. But the student membership, if you're in college, is something like $35 a year. I mean, it's nothing. And last couple years, they allowed every individual to apply to 3 scholarships. That was the cap. But I just want everyone to realize that what's amazing about the WAI scholarship program, they've given out something like $25 million since they started in the 1980s. There's like over 100 scholarships every year, and there's everything from aircraft dispatcher to flight certifications to maintenance scholarships. There's management scholarships. There's, thanks to, I'm going to take a little bit of credit. They have an aerospace engineering scholarship. I helped the very first person who got it. I handed her a $10,000 check on stage
Wow.
at the conference that year. Scholarships for anything that you can possibly want to do in aviation and a little bit aerospace. And what's a sad statistic, just to encourage people to listen, is almost every year there's a percentage of scholarships where they don't award it. And when I ask them why, they're like, well, no one applied. What do you mean no one applied?
Yeah.
What do you mean no one applied? So check out wai.org in July, and you'll start to see they load scholarships all the way through October. The window usually closes October or November. It changes every year. But they'll add scholarships as new sponsors come on board. And there was like 120 something scholarships, I think, last year.
Oh,
So
wow.
I know that finances tends to be a barrier
Mm.
to a lot of people, male and female, getting into the industry. To get a commercial pilot license now from scratch, if you go to a flight school that takes you all the way through, it's about $80,000 to get a
Wow.
commercial license now. All the ratings that you need in sequence. Aerospace engineering schools are really expensive. Go after those scholarships, and Society of Women Engineers has them as well.
Wow. There's so much out there to like research and take a look because people want to help and
Yeah,
people want to have more engineers out there or like aerospace, aviation, anything. There's money out there
yes,
for you to take a look, apply, and hopefully be able to live your passion and live your dreams of whatever STEM field it is.
definitely, definitely, absolutely.
Thank you so much for all the insights and for answering the Career Corner questions. I had such a great time listening. I'm like, I don't know if you realize, I'm like sitting there such an awe because like of the stories and all the things that you've gone through to just be here and just and the passion that you have for what you're doing, it's just like I wish I have no words. Sorry.
Well, thank you, Maria. I really appreciate it. I just, like I said, I could talk all day, which is the bad
Yeah.
part. But I do love what I do, and I love helping people. And
Yeah.
the young women I've mentored, and by the way, I'm mentoring a young man now, and he's
Mm,
amazing. So I don't just mentor women.
yeah.
Just the giving back to people
Mm-hmm.
to help them, hopefully get through some of the
Yeah.
struggles that I struggle with a little easier than
Yeah.
I did. That's really my goal. And again,
Mm-hmm.
especially helping women because we tend to have some
Yeah.
challenges that the men
Yeah.
don't in my
That's true.
industries.
So if listeners want to connect with you or try to join one of these groups, where do they head to?
The best place to reach me is through my website, which is
Okay.
jillrmyers.com. There's a contact me page. You can write to me on there.
Mm.
And of course, LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Anyone who wants to send me a note on LinkedIn or send me an invite, just reach out that way.
Well, thank you so much again. Thank you for everyone who is till the end of the video. I'm so excited and I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Don't forget to give Jill some love and don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment and tell us what your favorite part of this episode is. And hope to see you all soon. Thanks again.